The maps of the far north were always wrong. They had been copied, amended, guessed at, and smudged by greasy fingers over centuries, and still the coastlines wandered like drifts in a gale. Jon Snow spread the vellum out regardless and anchored the corners beneath a dagger. His cup, a sack of iron nails and ghost's paw. A thin candle burned low and bled wax onto the inked lines of the Bay of Seals. Wind skirled past the shutters, looking for purchase. The room smelled of tallow, damp fur, and the salt that clung to men who had come from the sea. "Skagos," he said, tapping the blot of island with the butt of the dagger. "King's house here, deep down, Driftwood Hall." He'd learned the names from old books and older men who'd never seen them. The ink made them seem near. The wind reminded him they were not. People on the island call their lords Crowell and Stain and Magner. They were kings once in the way the first men remember kings. They have their own oaths. "Aye," said Cotter Pike, scratching at his beard. "Their oaths are to drown our men and eat 'em after, if the storms don't do the drowning first. We used to put harpoons in the seals out there. Lost 3 ships in one winter. One came back with all the crew gone and the deck painted black with pitch. Then the pitch turned out to be blood." Jon didn't smile. The hard man puffed and cracked his knuckles. All sea and bone and sinew. He had sailed from Eastwatch to bring the tale he'd heard in Meadstown from a whaler who traded hides and salt cod for glass knives that cut like whispers and broke like ice. Dragonglass. The word had not left Jon's thoughts since. "We saw Obsidian at the Fist," Jon said. The room dipped and flashed with memory. A bundle of black knives and a cache beneath the snow, left by hands as old as the children. The knives had killed another. Samwell had done that with one. Samwell was gone now, south with a ship and a promise. "We need more," Cotter grimaced. "If the islanders have any to sell." "We have iron," Jon said. "We have salt, oats, casks, wool. We have men to trade. And if they won't sell, they'll take and we'll fight," Cotter finished for him. "Ever the way o' the world. Lord Commander, with your leave, I've ships. I'll go to Skagos with words in my mouth. And if words won't do, I've got a mouth full of teeth." Bowen Marsh's breath steamed in the chill behind him. "You mean to leave the wall short? To send men to chase at old tales in the Bay of Seals while the dead are walking in the woods?" Jon turned. Bowen had color again from the fire and the warmed wine, but his eyes were the same ever-worrying dark. "I mean to arm the living," Jon said. "If the others come in force, bows and good northern steel won't be enough. We know what breaks them. We know the black glass cuts. We do not have enough to put in the hands of every man, woman, and child between the wall and the bar rollins. We have enough for a story." "Stories don't keep a fire lit," Bowen muttered. "They kindle it," Jon said. "We send a ship, not half the watch, not a third. A ship, Cotter." Cotter Pike's grin showed broken yellow teeth. "A ship I got. The Night's Thief is fast enough to run from storms and raiders, but heavy enough to carry home your shiny black stones. Give me a clever tongue to wag for you when mine starts cursing, and I'll bring you back more glass knives than you've got belts to hang 'em on." Jon's hand found the hilt of Long Claw without thinking, and Ghost leaned into his knee. Outside the shutter, the wind shifted. It carried a low howl that might have been a beast or a hinge. The candle threw slow shadows. "I'll give you a letter," he said to Cotter. "Sealed with the black. Tell them we come with trade and goodwill. Tell them the watch remembers that their blood is first men blood. Tell them what comes out of the snow behind our backs." Bowen wet his lips. "If they won't parley, then we pay them to teach us how they shape the glass," Jon said. "The children napped it as arrowheads and spear points. The free folk can nap. So can men of Skagos if the tales are true. We have wood for shafts and sinew for binding and feathers for fletching. We lack the black stone. We lack enough hands," Bowen said, but he swallowed the rest. "I'm not asking you to like it," Jon said softer. "I'm asking you to count the arrows in the barrels and to count the lives they'll buy. 2 winters from now, when the mists roll in off the bay and the blue eyes walk with the ice at their ankles, you'll want those arrows. 2 winters." Bowen looked at the window like he could see forward through snow. You think we've that long? I'll treat every hour as if it were the last, John said. But I need to find a way to make more hours. Bowen bowed his head. It was not assent, but it was not refusal either. Cotter's grin widened into something like faith. John watched the candle burn lower and thought of Sam with his shaking hands and the feel of obsidian grating against an other's frozen collarbone. In the morning, the wind had its way with Eastwatch's banners. The night's thief stood in the chop tied to the canted stone dock like a horse on a short lead. Men moved like dark ants across her deck and up the gangplank with hampers of salt beef. A cask of honeyed ale that Cotter had claimed from a smuggler's net, bolts of coarse wool, iron nails, sacks of barley, 2 tons of oatcake, and a chest with a black wax seal pressed in with the raven and sword. Ghost watched from the snow. He didn't blink when the salt bit the air. John told himself he would send Cotter and return to Castle Black with letters and orders and a ration of Bowen's scowls. He told himself a Lord Commander didn't have the luxury to chase a rumor past the cold line of the horizon. He told himself oaths were as much bones as words. He boarded the night's thief at noon with his cloak streaked white from the spindrift and his mind as settled as a winter. Like, your sword arm's worth 2 men and a wolf, Cotter said, clapping him on the back hard enough to rattle ribs. I'll take it. You'll use my name before my sword, John said. He stood in the stern while the sailors cast off and the ship heeled away from the gray stones of Eastwatch, prow cutting the still water into little glass knives of its own. The wall ran west along the edge of the world, a white line under a low sky. Men waved from the top. They were small black pricks against the cold. The sails went up with the sound of canvas snapping. The night's thief turned her face toward a bruise of cloud in the north and the island that lived inside the bruise, and the world became water and cold and the taste of iron on the tongue. The crossing took the measure of them. The Bay of Seals had 1,000 moods and none of them were kind. The wind would die and leave the ship rocking on dead water like a cradle. Then it would spring howling from nowhere, scraping at faces and fingers with 10,000 needles. They saw seals hauled out on ice pans like scattered stones and a white bear that watched the ship with curious eyes and then slipped away without a sound. Once something broke water off the starboard bow, a hump in the gray, and Cotter's harpooners, lean men with hands like rope, ran to the rail with lines coiled, but whatever it was only rolled an eye like a coin and slid down into the black again. On the 3rd day they saw the island. It rose from the sea as a long, dark beast, shoulders of rock, back bristling with pines. The clouds seemed to sit upon it, and the sea at its feet was white with foam despite the wind's sudden hush. A crag gave way to a strip of shingle and a small harbor, if harbor it could be called. A scooped bight out of stone with a broken-toothed palisade and black huts that crouched beneath the cliff. Smoke rose from them in thin fingers. Cotter spat. King's house, he said, or so men put on paper. It looks like a place to beach a corpse. There's a hearth, John said. There's life. The men of King's house came down like weather. They wore sealskins and wool and furs patched with hide that might have been unicorn or deer. Some had helms of bone. Most went bareheaded, hair stiff with salt. Their weapons were not pretty, but they looked as if they'd been used. The worst of the stories whispered in winter camps wrapped around them like fog. And then the fog blew away when John met their eyes and saw only men looking back. Hard men, hungry men, men with a pride that would not kneel easily. A woman stepped forward with a spear taller than she and a head etched with old runes. The spear point was black and glinted like a wet crow's wing. John couldn't stop looking at it. You bring a letter, the woman said. Her words were thick as if they'd been salted and dried and soaked again. You bring a wolf. We have eyes. We have a sea. We have no use for your paper. I bring trade, John said, handing down the chest with the black seal. I bring iron. I bring nails to hold your houses against the winter and casks to hold your water, and wool to keep your babes warm. I bring barley and oats and salt. And I bring a need. The watch asks for glassstone. At that the woman laughed, and behind her the gathered men and women laughed as well, a low rough sound like stones grinding. The watch asks? The watch has never asked of Skagos. It has sent men to take. We gave them stones before. They lay under the sea with their mouths full of it. We do not come with swords drawn, John said, though Longclaw weighed at his hip like a promise. We are not here to harvest men. We want what lies in your earth. We'll buy it. We do not sell our island, she said, and the spear point dipped an inch. You have 10 breaths to take yourself and your ship back out into the gray before the crown of your head breaks. Cotter took a half step forward, and John's hand took his wrist. John looked up at the cliff. On its lip were more men. He looked at the woman and saw no hate except what the sea puts in everyone. My name is Jon Snow, he said. I serve as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. I took my vows before heart trees and salt winds. I came to speak with the Magner of King's House if he'll have me, and the Lords Crowell and Stain if they'll have me, and with any fisher or napper or hunter who will trade the work of his hands for the work of mine. And if none will, I'll leave. Silence is a kind of courage. He let it stand for the space of 5 heartbeats. Ghost sat at his hip and gave a wolf's small sound that was not a growl, exactly. The woman's eyes went to the white beast. The cliff-born wind made a sound like a horn far above them, and a man in a cloak of black and gray sealskin stepped out from the shadow of the palisade gate. He had hair like iron, gone to salt at the temples, and eyes as pale as wave foam. His breastplate had once been good steel, cast in some Southron hall, but it had been careened with black pitch until it drank the light. He carried no sigil that John recognized, only a simple torque of hammered silver around his neck. You speak well, Lord Snow, he said. Come and spend your words. If they make better warmth than seal fat, we'll know. I am Arn Magner, called Arn o' the Rocks. Your wolf comes with you. The seaman with teeth can wait below. They climbed into the island like men going up the spine of an old whale, and the village fell behind and below with its boats drawn up on the shingle. The houses at King's House were built with their backs dug into the stone and their faces to the wind. There was a hall at the top, long and low, its roof made from the bones of something enormous and the hull of an old ship turned upside down, tarred and black. Inside the hall there was light and heat and the smell of broth boiling with fish and onions. Arn Magner's people watched and said nothing. Children peered from behind legs. A boy with a mop of dark hair and eyes too wild to be tamed stared openly at Ghost until Osha's rough voice snapped his name and he vanished like a rabbit into a hole. The woman with the spear stood with her back to a pillar, listening without listening, her gaze sliding from John to the door to the hearth. Your letter says what your mouth says, Arn observed after breaking the black seal and reading the lines with a finger. You want black stone. You have iron and nails and casks and oats and wool. You say the dead walk, which we know already. You say you killed an other with a glass knife, which we've been saying for years to anyone drunk enough to hear. You have glass stone, John said, because he could not stop himself from looking at the spear points on the racks and the knives at belts. He recognized the napping. The flake scars running in crescents, the edges sharp enough to draw blood from the air. The children could have made these. The free folk could have. So could Skagosi hands, then. And if there was this much fashioned, there was more in the earth. Can you dig it? Some is in stone teeth under the earth, a crooked man to Arn's left said. His cheeks were wind-burnt and his nose had been broken twice, once to the right, once the other way. Some we gather after storms. The sea spits it out like bones it doesn't want. We do not mind much. The island takes what you put into her. Sometimes the black flows under the ground, and it sets like glass inside rock. Can be heavy. It breaks. We don't need swords of it, John said quickly. Arrowheads, speartips, knives, things a man can carry by the 100. We can pay. Aye, said Arn, weaving the silver torque in his fingers. You can pay. But why should Skagos empty its coffers for the wall? Because the dead walk and the wall is the gate, John said. Because your children play in the shadow of it. Whether you say your prayers in a sept or under a heart tree or in a cave with a broken god. Because when the dead take a man's breath, he'll march with them to your door same as any other door, and Glassstone is a way of saying no. Arn put the torque back around his neck and flicked a glance to the woman with the spear. You're not wrong. But we remember iron-born with axes at our doors. We remember men flying wolves and flayed men on their rags. We remember Stark lords who drowned us in our own coves. We remember the Watch sending ships to find rebels and load them for hanging. We remember the last king who came to Skagos, with a bright cloak and a long list of demands. He left with his hands. He returned with fewer. John hadn't come to make apologies for old lords and old wrongs. He knew their weight all the same. "We share enemies," he said. "And Winter, trade with me. I'll leave no men behind. I'll not ask your oaths, only your price." "Price?" Arn repeated softly, as if tasting the salt on it. "We have iron, too. We have seals and unicorns and fish and the bones of whales. We need grain, fewer storms, a gentler sea. Can you charge the moon to set elsewhere?" "No," John said. "I can send ships each turn of the moon with grain and oats and wool and iron. I can take black stone away by the ton and send back men who know how to nap it to teach others. I can ask White Harbor to open its gates to your boats. I can place my word that the Watch will defend your boats as it defends others against raiders." At the word White Harbor, a murmur ran through the hall, a ripple in a pond of men. Arn's eyes sharpened. "Manderly," he said, "fat lord in his white tower. He has wanted our fish and our bones for years. He does not want our men. He puts Skagos on papers as if it were a dog. If Lord Manderly sees black stone trade, he'll want it," John allowed. "He'll want it a great deal. He'll build you a dock for it and coin men to count it. I'll stand in that counting and keep the scales true." The woman with the spear finally spoke again. "You do not smell of lies," she said. "You smell of cold. But words and oaths break when they are carried over water. Maybe give us a thing that isn't carried." John considered. He could offer iron. He could offer swords. He could offer his name, the old sword at his side, the wolf that watched. And yet what would say more than a horse or a barrel? He looked to Arn and the torches and the hall roof that had once been a ship. "There is a boy with wild hair who stared at my wolf," he said instead, before caution could stop him. "A boy with a shadow hound that wears the wrong flesh. I know him, the wolf told me." He didn't know how to explain the knowing, only that ghost had gone still and bright at the boy, and John had felt a name rattle in his bones like a loose oar. "His name is Rickon Stark. He should be hidden. He should be guarded until the world is ready to see him again." The hall changed. The air itself changed. Arn Magner did not move, but there was a shift in him that was as sure as a tide. The woman with the spear's fingers tightened just so. Somewhere behind John, someone sucked in a breath. The sound of boiling broth made itself known again in the silence after. "You know his name," Arn said, quieter than before. "I know his blood," John said, aware that his own heart had taken to hammering as if it were trying to break a door. "I won't ask to see him. I won't ask to take him. Your island hid him when the world couldn't bear him. Keep hiding him. Keep him safe. If you need iron and grain to do it, take it. If you need the Watch to carry messages to and from White Harbor that never see a maester's eye, I'll see it done. And if you want a thing that won't rot, take what I came to trade. A chance for your children to live because they hold black arrows in their hands." Arn sat very still. His pale eyes drifted to Ghost again and then to John's face as if weighing one against the other. The torque caught a tongue of firelight and gleamed. "You lied once to say you would not ask oaths. You're asking now in another wa. Why? You ask us to keep a kingling alive for a day that might never come. You ask us to trust your fat lord in his river mouth to want anything that isn't a feasting table. You ask us to tie our island to yours when both of us float where we please." "I ask for trade," John corrected softly. "The rest, call it a favor I owe if favors have weight on your island. I can pay in oats and iron and in men with bows who know what to do with your glass." Arn's mouth quirked, the ghost of a smile learning to be born. "Favors weigh more than iron on Skagos," he said. He looked to the woman. "Morga," she shrugged. "If he is what his wolf says, and he is, then he's a man who'll bury his dead himself. I can bargain with such." "2 ships," Arn said. We will not harvest the island for you as fishers fetch cod. We'll cut from the teeth under the ground and gather from the sea and make our points and knives and spearheads. We'll load 2 ships for you at each new moon, less if the sea is angrier than you are, and you'll send grain and wool and iron and those that know how to strike the stone without killing themselves. We'll keep the boy with the shadow hound where cold and wind will strip a man of lies. You will say nothing. Your fat lord will say nothing. Your wolf will say nothing. Done, John said. Then eat. Arn invited and broke bread that was really oatcake and dipped it into broth. He did not smile again, but something in the hall nodded. Men talked like men again, and not like breakers striking rock. A child laughed somewhere. A short burst of sound like an arrow loosed. John ate with an appetite that surprised him. The stew of fish and onion and some green herb native to these cliffs tasted like a thing that had to be earned. He watched the people moving in the hall. He watched Morga with the spear slip out like a shadow. He watched the slow way Arn chewed and the faster way his eyes took count. He watched the door. When Davos Seaworth came through it an hour later, cloak soaked in spray and hair clotted to his skull, and the left side of his face caught in the permanent half-sneer that the missing fingers gave it, John very nearly choked on his stew. The smuggler blinked at him the way a man blinks when he has walked 3 days to find a fire only to find the man already sitting at it is an old ghost. 7 hells, Davos said, which was a way of saying hello where he came from. Lord Snow, I did not expect your pretty face here. I could say the same, John returned. He set down his bowl and rose. Ghost already stood with the hair along his spine high. What wind blows the onion knight to Skagos? A fat one, Davos said wryly. And a hungry one. Lord Manderley sent me to fetch a child out of the wolf's mouth. I would say more, Lord, but I can see from your eyes and your white friend that you already know the name. Or you think you do. Names can wait. Arn Magner cut through them. If we're going to be trading with White Harbor, we should know what the man who'll be haggling with us looks like. Thin, shrewd, missing fingers. Good. Sit. Warm yourself, Davos, o' the fingers. We'll talk bone and grain once your bones have stopped rattling. Davos shot John a look that asked 3 questions and answered none, and sank onto a bench near the fire with a sigh like a sail collapsing. The path had been chosen by 3 men who had not spoken then and there. John felt the twist in the rope of fate and then set his shoulders and took his place at the knot. The days on Skagos tasted of iron and salt and decisions. Men led John and Cotter to the places where the black stone lay like frozen rivers beneath the cliff faces. He had to crawl into the mouth of one such place on his belly, wedging his shoulders through a slot of rock while his breath misted the pitch black. Ghost went ahead because there was nothing in all the 7 kingdoms so stubborn as a white wolf who thought himself wiser than men. In the chamber beyond the slot, John lit a stub of tallow and held it low. The light licked the stone and made it gleam with midnight colors, dull and glossy at once. The dragonglass ran through the rock in a seam like a vein in a wrist, 3 hands wide at the narrow and widening to a man's shoulders and then narrowing again where the rock closed over it. It had bubbled once, long ago when the world was molten around it. Fingers had bitten it. Now it slept in black. Don't use a pick, Morga said behind him. The glass will punish you. Wedge a bone under it or a narrow iron pry. Work slow. You take a small piece. You take another. Greedy men lose their hands. Outside, men set tarred hides on the ground and carried out the dark pieces wrapped in cloth, as careful as midwives. Knappers sat with antler billets and copper hammers and struck in curves. The sound of it was music, stuttering and sweet. Flakes fell like rain. Edges were born with bright, delicate sibilance. John sat with them until his tailbone went numb and took a billet himself, and then set it down after a flake bit his glove and went through skin as if it had been longing all winter to find warmth. He sucked at the blood and laughed softly. The napper beside him grinned without malice and showed him the angle again. The next blade John made was ugly and would shatter if he looked sideways at it. He kept it. The harbor changed day by day. The first ship loaded with barrels of barley and oats and wool arrived from Eastwatch with Cotter's roar announced ahead of it by gulls. The second carried iron, and a smith who had made arrowheads in his sleep since he was 15 came with it. along with a wildling woman whose name was Tam and whose hands on the glass looked as if they'd been made for it by some vengeful god. Tam had a child on her hip and a stone in her hand and said the children had taught her mother's mother's mother to strike the flakes. John did not question it. He put her on the first boat north to Eastwatch with 3 nappers from Skagos and a promise of bread, then to White Harbor. He wanted the sound of napping to echo from every longhouse and holdfast and fisher's hut in the north. Davos watched all of this with his mouth tight, as if he'd lost a fish too heavy to haul and didn't want to admit it. He spoke with Arn Magner and with Morga and the Crowl, who came from deep down with crews of sealers, and with old Lord Stain of Driftwood Hall, whose hair was as white as ghost and whose hands trembled when he tried to bring a cup to his mouth, but whose voice could still crack silk. Between those talks, he found time to drag John into the lee of a stone and growl. "Why did you bring your oath to this place to lick its secrets other men are trying to keep?" "There's no keeping of this one," John said, looking out at the sea that boiled against the island's flanks. "Not forever. You'll take him to White Harbor. Lord Manderley will hide him under fat and feast. The Boltons will sniff the air. The Freys will sniff the air. My men will sniff the air. Even if we never say his name, the world will learn." Davos rubbed at his jawline where the hair went gray and iron. "You're not wrong. I just don't have to like it. I'm arming the North," John said. "2 winters early if the gods are kind. If the boy is the price I pay to buy it time, I'll pay. Keep him hidden as long as you can. I'll make it so that when his name is said, men and women who have never tasted more than oat porridge have knives that can cut what cannot be cut and arrows that break the icemen and send the pieces skittering like beetles." He did not say that this could keep him from a noose or a knife himself. Davos's eyes said it. Ghost's eyes said something else. When the first 2 Skagosi ships pushed their blunt noses into White Harbor, the city took a breath as if it had seen the sea itself mount the causeway. Manderley's men counted and weighed and oiled the scales, hands moving fast to hide their trembling. They had never seen so much black stone. They had never let men from Skagos walk their quays without a ring of spears. Now they stood aside in their pale cloaks and watched as a short, sharp woman with a seal-bone buckle at her belt jumped down onto their stones and looked around as if she had been born to measure cities. Tam began to speak before any man could. Her voice was rough as a net, and it pulled men in with the same inevitability. If this one had been born a queen, John thought, no one would have broken it to her. The Merman's court took a long time deciding. Wyman Manderley placed his fat hands on the arms of his seat and spoke around pastry, but his eyes were quick as knives under ice. He listened to Tam and to Cotter and to John's message carried in sealed letters. He heard what Davos Seaworth whispered under other tapestries. In the end, Lord Manderley smiled, and fat and politics and mathematics put on the face of righteousness and nodded. "White Harbor will build racks and spaces and bring in feathers and sinew. We will train Fletchers until the air is full of arrows," he rumbled. "We will pay the nappers weight in coin the city can survive, and we will keep our mouths shut in proportion to what is safe for our city and for a certain small wolf. In the matter of your other killing, Lord Commander, we will put quivers in every ship and every fisher's hands and every watchman's hand along the white knife. The North remembers grief, and I will give it arrows." Letters flew then. John wrote them until his knuckles locked, and Ed Tollett stole his ink because he said a man could drown in it if he didn't stop. Black arrows went for Bear Island and Skagos and back, for the Rills and the Stony Shore and Carhold and Last Hearth and Barrowton. The Bogs took a share, and the Crannogmen nodded and straightened their reeds. The Umbers laughed until they saw what black can do against blue, and then they only grinned with more teeth. Meege Mormont's daughters sent back a letter scorched at the corners by a hearth too fierce, saying only, "If the dead come paddling up our shore, we'll give him a dark welcome." The wharf at Castle Black acquired a second life as a weapons rack. Men used to the weight of oaken barrels moved bundles of long waxed linen sacks from ship to horse to cart to the road. Trading men and woodsmen came to Eastwatch and left with their backs bent like question marks. And the question was, will this be enough? The first other came to Eastwatch with the fog one night when the moon was high and unfamiliar. He walked out of the sea, and the sea made no sound where he touched it. Men at the watchfires didn't see him until the frost crept from their boots to their knees and their breath caught in their lungs like birds that had flown into glass. The man in the tower reached for the bell rope and found his fingers blue. He could not cry out. He could only watch the figure move across the shingle like a thought. It was beautiful. It was wrong. Its armor held the moon like an old friend. He had nightmares of water after, and none of them had sound in them. John had men posted where sound isn't the first warning. A boy from the Shadow Tower named Treg saw the air go white and kicked the scout sergeant in the shin until the man swore and turned and saw the other with his sword of crystal in his hand and a line of dead seals coming onto the beach behind it. Eyes like lamps under the ice. Treg didn't wait for orders. He took one of the new arrows with the glossy black head and a fletching dyed with blue chalk and set it and drew until he thought his shoulder would rip and let fly with a prayer that belonged to no god anyone south kept. The arrow took the other low in the belly. The moment it bit, frost hissed. The belly broke like a mirror dropped from a wall. The light went out in its armor and then through it, and the creature came apart with the indifference of a statue losing pieces to time, an arm here, a shoulder there. The sword shivered into pieces that made no sound as they hit stone. The seals halted like toys when the child who'd made them sleep with eyes open finally stopped pretending to breathe for them. Men at the bell rope remembered how to use it. The sound went up like joy. The next one received 2 arrows. The third walked into the ash of the second. John was halfway down the stairs of the East Tower with Ghost taking the steps 2 at a time when the men on the beach began to laugh. The hysteric laugh of men who found out their nightmares have joints like other things. He didn't share it. He looked at the broken pieces of what had been terror and wondered what else the world would ask him to learn to love enough to break. "Now they'll come more often," Cotter Pike said beside him. Hair rhymed with frost and a grin so savage it could have been a wound. "Now they know we have knives with their names on them." "Aye," John said. "Put the nappers on half rations and double their pay. Rotate the watchmen so each man feels the pull of the bowstring at least once every 2 days. Keep 2 quivers to a man on the towers and 3 on the beach. Send word to White Harbor and to the Shadow Tower. Tell them it works. Tell them to keep the stone coming." Bowen Marsh did not smile, but when he touched one of the broken shards with a boot, there was something almost like relief in the way his shoulders eased. He asked for one of the arrowheads in a small voice, and when it was given he went away and men later found him by the heart tree, the black stone in his palm like a weight that did not sink him as much as other things did. The news went into the north as if it had been a fire running along dry bracken. The effect was not subtle. The first freight of black arrowheads to Last Hearth arrived the day after a pair of whites wandered from a gully and into a shepherd's yard, and the shepherd's boy with the lazy eye put one of the points into the white's skull and then into its neck when it still moved, and when the thing crept toward him dragging a leg like a dog with a trap on it, he put 3 more into the cold behind its eyes and left them there. He would be 15 in the spring. He grew of an evening 2 inches taller then and there, in his father's words. He also kept the arrow that broke in the thing's teeth as a talisman, and his sister sang to it. They were not strange to each other. In the rills, a hedger twisted a black point onto a stick and put it into a corpse that had not belonged to him the day before. He did it with tears on his face and did it again and then slowly stopped shaking. On Bear Island, they drilled until women's bows thrummed like bees. On the Bar Rollins, men knelt to the dead and then stood and did what they had to do. Winterfell did not send for any because the Boltons had no need of what they did not believe in. They believed in knives in the dark and the weight of land. The first pink letter came to the wall while the wind was trying to peel it away. John read it standing at his window with the low light turning the parchment a color like old bone. He let the words go through him without stopping, like arrows flying to strike nothing but snow. He did not let any one word lodge. "Come see. You have me. Reek. Your sister. Bastard." John folded the letter and slid it under a loose stone in the sill and covered it with his hand for a long moment as if weight could matter against some things. Then he went down to the yard and watched Ed Tollett teach a boy who hated him to fletch feathers straight. Not long after, Melisandre came to him wrapped in likely every red thing she had ever owned. She smiled and the winter sunlight took it for something and cast it sideways, and then it gave up. "You are changing the shape of the enemy's shadow," she said without need of greeting. "I see it when I stare into the coals. The black glass is dark in the flames to other eyes, but to mine it gleams. There is favor there." "That is not why I'm doing it," John said. He had never learned how to speak to Melisandre in a way that left him feeling as if he'd gotten what he'd wanted. He doubted anyone had. "I'm doing it because the glass works." She tilted her head. "You should know there is a price for making the future look different. I collect prices, not just mine, others. When you make a path where there was not one, you find a different cliff to fall off. When you kept the boy with the black dog from the fat lord's table for another month, you lifted one knife from one throat and put it near another. It is a pretty trick. I'd teach you if I thought you had fingers nimble enough. I'd sooner keep the knives where they belong, in hands that fight for the living," John said. He met the red eyes and did not look away. "You and your king." "My king and I," she corrected gently. "You will have your due. I won't let you burn children to catch shadows. I will let you open your priestess's mouth and breathe faith to men if they'll take it. But the black glass is not yours or mine or theirs. It's for everyone whose breath fogs the air when they stand in a doorway and look at a winter morning. I'll take that price." Her smile widened. "Your God likes you. He likes stubborn boys who think they're wolves." She turned without ceremony then and went away like a flame might if it had legs. John watched her cloak twitch in the wind and thought of fires banked for a long night. Stannis Baratheon took obsidian points in his mailed fist and held them like a man who had learned long ago to weigh and measure without thinking. He did not thank John, not with his mouth. He swung a black blunt-bellied fist to call his captains and had them see to it that every man in his retinue carried more arrows than he had carried in the Reaver War. He said, "Put some into Asha Greyjoy's hands as well. Have her men learn to put them into the trees if they cannot put them into foes. If they must shoot at the skulls of their own arrogance, let T.M. do it. It might take the point off." He called for Melisandre then, and John left. He had hammered too many nails into that day to watch a king gnaw on iron. Snow came and then stayed. The Bay of Seals froze along the quays, and men went out onto it on ashwood skates, laughing careful as they did. For nobody is so brave as he thinks when a thing under him can crack. The Skagosi learned to like oat bread that wasn't boiled into paste. The men of White Harbor learned that seals had more meat on them than gossip. A napper from deep down made a child for the first time in his life outside an old hut, and he did not know what to do with his hands and then figured it out. Old Stain died and was wrapped in sealskin and given to the sea, and his last words to Morga had been, "Keep the boy until the dogs have quit their baying." She kept them. Not all of the black glass the sea spit up was clean. Some pieces came in with old blood caught in their scars, and men said those were stronger. A lie, like many lies, had a clear shape. It still warmed a man's fingers in a hard wind to believe it. The arrows didn't make any man better at drawing a bow. John still had to stand with boys until their shoulders burned and their wives had scolded them to put the sticks down and come eat. He told them stories of how it had worked at Eastwatch, of how Treg had put the first one into the belly and how they'd laughed like men who had not been men for a moment. He made it into a story he wanted to hear in the mouths of others. He watched it become one. The others came at the Long Lake 2 months later. A hunter came whooping into Queen's Crown on a mule with shoes on only one diagonal set of hooves and said he had seen eyes in the fog, and the fog had been walking. Men came out with their new arrows and their old fear, and the fog did the rest. It made them think of mothers half-remembered and men they'd killed and a night under a stair with a girl they should have married. It made the horses rear and the mules sit down like old women in the snow. Out of it came shapes. They were not many. They did not have to be. The first man to die was named Hamtober. It mattered that he had a name to someone, but not to the thing that cut his throat. The next man, Wedge, had a wife who knew how to spit into a fire and find the wind. And he lived because he moved the way she had told him to move when smoke came down a chimney. The line did not break. A brown-haired woman put an arrow into the ankle of a thing that had no ankles, and the thing broke there because she believed it would. John, a mile away with a white wolf and a tower between him and his breathing, heard the tink-tink-tink of glass cracking on ice and sprinted anyway. He arrived to find men shocked at being alive. He had learned to stand in the space where that shock lived and press something useful into it. He pressed orders and praise and the weight of work. They took it because they had nothing else to do with their hands. The next morning, a raven went to Carhold with black glass flake edges bound in a twist of grass to the leg. It broke its wing in a storm and fell into a drift near the Dreadfort, and a Bolton scout found it and put his hand into it and came away with a cut. He held the cut too long and then sucked at it with his eyes narrowed. He carried the bird to his lord, and his lord read the note and said nothing at all, which was worst. Not long after that, the pink letter came. If the first had been a child's rage, this was a man's. John lifted it and felt its weight and set it down again and thought, "The knives are already sheathed in places neither of us can see." He might have died that day if he had not taken the habit of keeping the yard full at midday, and if Tormund Giantsbane had not been teaching a small boy to curse in 5 tongues, and if Bowen Marsh had not been sitting with the black stone arrowhead in his palm like a saint with a relic. The shout and rush from behind took time to form, and in that time John moved, and in moving he did the thing he had been warning himself not to do since he had left Castle Black for Eastwatch weeks ago. He left men behind to die for him. Only one lunged with a knife. Another only stumbled toward him with his hands lifted in a way that could have been pleading. The knife went past his leather and into his skin, but only just so before Tormund's knee hit his stomach and air went out, and Bowen's voice cried, "Hold!" in a way that carried a weight it had not carried in months. The mood broke. The snow had not thawed, but something in the yard had. John bled and coughed and then found his feet, and his hand closed on something black, not the color of Longclaw's grip. It was the arrowhead Bowen had always been turning in his hand without knowing it, and somehow it was in John's hand. He laughed, crazed at the edge and surprised to be alive, and the men around him laughed as well. The man with the knife wept. He lived. Bowen took John's arm very gently, and they went inside like men who had fought and lost something and still breathed. "You're sending out of the wildlings," Bowen said later without looking up, the arrowhead now on the table like a bead between them. "Your talk of riding south for your sister, that letter you hide like a rat hides fat. I cannot say I forgive them, but I will say the day you put that first black glass into a boy's hand and told him to shape it into an arrow, you bought us another winter. Maybe 2. You bought us away to—" He stopped, as if the word had broken his mouth. "To hope. I'll not be buying hope with anyone's life I can spare," John said. "I won't ride to Winterfell. If men must ride, they'll ride on north roads and south roads with quivers on their backs and drums at their hips that tell them to move and move again. We'll eat the stores meant for 3 winters and get more. We'll empty the merman's court of feathers and sinew. We'll teach. We'll be very dull." Bowen reached Ed for the arrowhead and then did not touch it. "I never thought I would be grateful for dull. I never thought I would be able to keep dull alive this long," John said. He reached and closed Bowen's fingers around the arrowhead. Bowen let them rest there as if it were warmer than it was. Word of the black sea stone and the boy with the black dog reached ears it should not have in due time, because nothing held in the north holds fast forever. Ramsay Bolton sent a man with eyes like pondweed to talk to a shipwright in White Harbor, who drank and told better stories than he had lived through. Ever so many small weak things clogged the mouths of men who needed to keep a secret. John learned this from a woman who sold fish and did not wish to sell anything else, and he sent Davos south with a cargo of lies that were shaped true enough to be mistaken for the truth. Davos walked into the merman's court and bowed and said he had found the boy not in Skagos at all but in a cave above the last river, and the fat lord put a hand over his heart and said, "Why, that's where I thought you'd find him. I had a feeling we should search that place and no other," and then told Davos to bow again and again, because if a man is going to move coins across a table with a thief's fingers, he may as well laugh while he does it. On Skagos, Morga-trained girls not yet bled to stand with spears that laughed in the light with their black tooth grins, and Rickon Stark stalked men's shadows with a dog taller than the years he had seen. He sat on the parapet of King's House with his heels nodding and unknodding together and watched ships like toys come and go. He did not wave. He learned to strike flint for fire with cold hands. Osha taught him what to do when the wind lies and the pine trees make mouths. He did not say his brother's name. He said the wolves. There were nights when John lay on his back and stared at frost crystals on the rafters and counted the sounds of the wall. And in the counting he learned the sound the north makes when it is preparing itself. It was like a woman packing a basket before a long walk. The quiet tsk of small things in a bag, the way a door is opened and closed without haste, the murmur of men at the gate who have said goodbye to someone they did not think they would say goodbye to for a long time, but are not sorry to have been given the chance. It was the sound of arrows being counted out 10 by 10 by 10 by 10. It was the sound of the bay of seals moaning under ice and of nappers laughing when a good flake came off under a bad hand. It was the sound of Ed Tollett saying something so bleak men smiled without meaning to. It was not the sound of glory. John had learned not to listen for glory. He heard the sounds and thought, perhaps I have bought a year and will learn how to buy another, like a merchant who started with a single copper and now has two. There were missteps. A shipment was lost off Skagos when a storm picked up a ship and turned it over like a bowl, and the sea took the men and the black stone and the oat sacks without chivalry. White Harbor sent men to the shore with nets, and when they found no men to bury, they made arrows anyway and stood them in racks under oilcloth and whispered a list of names like prayer. A village along the last river put to sea 2 boats full of children when word came to run, and the ice took 1 boat and set it in place like a toy in a jar, and the other boat pulled it free with ropes and swearing and a woman who stood knee-deep in the river until her legs were numb because rope burns in water or out of it. The others did not come that day. They learned, though, that they could be pulled off the ice sometimes. A scribbler in a tower wrote this down in a book. It was not a thing John needed, but he felt easier knowing the book existed. He went to Skagos once more when the sea permitted it. He stood on the dock and watched Rickon run a hand along Ghost's back with the tentative wonder of someone reaching into a story. Shaggy Dog sniffed the air and decided not to kill anything that moment. Morga stood with her spear and said, "He grows like a weed in a latrine, ugly and strong." "He doesn't need to be pretty," John said. "No," she agreed. "He'll be king of a broken thing or not at all. He may only need to be a boy for a while longer," John said before he could stop himself. He watched his brother's hands. They had too much energy in them for any one body. He knew what that felt like. Tell him stories that let him sleep. "All our stories make men sleep," Morga said with a flash of humor that was as stark as anything had ever been. A cloud passed over the sun. They both looked up without meaning to. "We'll keep him until you come with a fleet." "I won't come with a fleet," John said. "I come with boats full of stone. Go on keeping him until you can't." "We will," she said, and that was that. On the way back, the night's thief hit a field of ice thin enough to cut you and thick enough to stop you. Men broke it with poles and cursing, and the boat shoved it aside like an old man parting a heavy curtain. Far out on the ice, a line of figures moved with their heads low, dragging something. John felt Ghost's attention bloom and pull like a tide. He stared and thought of black points and of the shape of a boy's hand. He did not order a chase. He could not have even if he had wanted. The ice was a sheet of knives and some were his. Spring did not come. It is not a part of this story. The seasons north of the neck remembered what they had been taught and held to it like old songs. What came instead was the bright, brittle cold that eats men who are ready and men who are not alike. It came with a sound like glass cracking far underfoot and a sky blue enough to hurt. The north held a breath and then another, kept breathing. 2 winters early meant that when the mists rolled off the shore of the Bay of Seals in a line as straight as law on a LD morning in what should have been late autumn, there were 3 boys on the Eastwatch parapet whose grips on their bows were easy, and whose arrows were black and sharp, and who did not need to be told twice where to aim. It meant that when a herd of dead horses found their way to the gates of Carhold, the Umber's cousin had a barrel of points he had traded ale and promises for last turn of the moon, and he poured them out like seeds and said, "Plant 'em straight." It meant that in 10 fisher huts between Skagos and Port White, men had knives for gutting fish that could split other things as readily, and when a hand came through a shutter in the night, a woman cut it before it could find her child's ankle. She cleaned the knife with brine and gave thanks to neither god she knew for it. It meant that when Wyman Manderley at last decided he could keep a secret no longer, or when the world decided for him and he opened his court to a small boy with the shape of a wolf in his face, He did so in a white harbor where every other man on the quay had a quiver at his back that glinted darkly in the sun. It meant men felt less foolish about the old stories, which is sometimes the whole difference between dying properly and not dying at all. John sent ravens and sent arrows and sent men with backs like bent bows out onto roads that were less roads each day. He kept his knife where he could see it. He slept less but better, if that makes sense. A man's sleep is not about hours, only about whether he knows what he should be doing when he wakes. He taught Ed Tollett to write orders that were short. He taught boys to strike glass with antler until their thumbs blistered, and then sent them to teach others. He taught himself what he could not bear to say in words, that saving one brother comes at another price, and he had not been made to pay that price now because he had already paid it. The gods, if there were any, weren't adding figures so much as gazing at the column of hash marks and smiling. Stannis moved his pieces against the Boltons with his stubborn heart. The battle he found in the snow outside Winterfell was as ugly as every story had promised and more. The Black Points did not stop knives in the dark or hunger in a man who would eat his own hand. They did not make banners behave. In the end, they saved 100 lives perhaps when the first other finally came to the edge of the field, drawn by the heat of men's stupidity as much as by any other thing, and a few men with bows took it in the chest and then in the throat and watched it come apart like light. This meant nothing to the men who died under other men's boots, and everything to the ones who did not. Later in taverns that did not yet exist, men would say that the day men first stood shoulder to shoulder with black in their quivers while they quarreled like idiots about Southron thrones was the day the North started to live again, because it remembered what it had been made to do. There were dark nights yet. They were not all one. A village in the shadows of the rills went quiet for 3 days, and when a man brave and stupid enough went to see why, he found the dead had gone walking in a circle around the hearth until they'd worn the floor smooth. He put stone into them and they went down, but the circle was there even after he boarded the door closed and walked away. A woman on Bear Island burned her own house while the men were out because her child had blue eyes. The child screamed and she screamed and then it was done, and the men returned and took their revenge on the wrong weather. Men in the swamps of the Neck went searching for flint and came up with bones, and sometimes those bones had arrows in them already, old black ones. They kept them. They said to each other in voices like reeds that the world is a long lesson and maybe men had finally found a page. John went to the heart tree and pressed his palm to it and felt the same old pulse, which is to say he felt his own and saw that it was coming back to him, which is what trees do. He spoke aloud to no one because sometimes a man needs to hear his own voice declare a thing. "The winter is a knife," he said. "We have knives too." Ghost lay with his muzzle on John's boot and watched him as if he had known this long ago and had only been waiting for John to know it too. In far White Harbor, in the hall where tapestries were thicker than some men's houses and the walls were hung with hooks meant for dolphins and bigger things, a small boy with a dog grown too big to sit at his feet listened to a fat lord talk about oaths and duty. He did not fidget. Osha had taught him that fidgeting is a flag for men who wish to call you a child for the rest of your life. His hands behaved. When Davos Seaworth stood at the edge of the light as if he had been drawn with a blunted quill and nodded to him once like an old captain to a cabin boy who had reefed his first sail, the boy nodded back. He had a stone in his pocket. He took it out sometimes at night and pressed his thumb to it until it hurt. It was black because it had been born of fire. It did not warm his hand. It did remind him that there were shapes in the world that looked like other things, that a knife point looked like a tear if you turned it toward your eye. In the end, Skagos learned to love ships in the way a man learns to love scars. Arn Magner's hair went whiter, and Morga found an apprentice whose hands were almost as good as hers, and who had no interest in stories that didn't have cutting in them. The island's children learned new curses that had to do with 3-feathered arrows and gulls. Men forgot to hate each other for a while because they were busy hating the cold and what lived in it more. This is a kind of peace, and sometimes it is the only kind you get. There were still maps, wrong as ever, that showed Skagos as a blot and the wall as a line and the bay as a gouge. John would set one out from time to time in Pu. Tee his finger where the black arrows started and traced to where they were needed. His nail made a dull rattling sound over the vellum that was somehow more pleasing than other sounds. He would think of the boys on the parapet with their easy grips, and of Treg's arrow in the first belly, and of Morga's spears, and of Tam in White Harbor with a child at her hip and stone at her hand. He would think of Rickon with Ghost's fur under his fingers, and that thought made his breath a little warmer in his own chest. When the great blue silence finally came, many winters later than it had planned to, it found the North full of arguments and small kindnesses and black points. It found a Lord Commander who had kept his oaths like a man keeps a house in a storm, by nailing boards over windows and sweeping out water and refusing to name as failure what was only a day. It found a fat lord with crumbs in his beard and justice in his hands. It found an island in the bay with a boy on a wall and a woman who had made a spear that would break in the right way when it was time. It found men who had learned to count again, not sheep in their sleep but arrows while awake. The others stepped out of the mist and 100 bows sang. It was not beautiful. It was not terrible. It was work. And the work had been prepared for 2 winters before it was absolutely needed, which meant that the men and women who did it like breathing could do it longer than they would have otherwise. That is all saving the world ever is, making it so that men can do a thing long enough to give birth to children who will not remember why anyone had to learn it in the first place. John stood with one hand on Ghost's neck and shouted about ranges and knocks and eyes, and the black rain went out, and things that had once believed themselves unbreakable learned otherwise. Somewhere in the white of the world, a boy in a hall put his thumbs to a stone in his pocket and felt comfort in its cold. Somewhere else, on a cliff above a moaning sea, a woman with a spear asked the wind if it would be kind and then didn't wait for an answer before leaning her weight into the strike. The arrows kept finding throats. The stone kept coming out of the island, slow and careful, and going back to the hands of men who did not know themselves for heroes. The map stayed wrong, and the North did what it had always done when the maps failed it. It went by smell and sound and the testimony of a hand on a cold thing. The wolves were quiet. The winter lasted as long as winters last. When it was over, there were 2 stones on John's windowsill. One arrowhead broken in the belly of a thing that had not been a man, and another ugly blade he had struck himself on Skagos that would never be used for anything but remembering. He put his hand over them both at times and felt the cold, and then he did the only thing left to do, which was to go down from his chamber and out into the yard where men were making more of what they would need, and lend his back and keep count.